Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all to celebrate the contribution of women to the technology industry, but also look at what the benefits are in society in general when we really help to unleash all that women are capable of. So if you see the slide on your screen, this is one of my favorite quotes in the world, and it's a quote that I opened my book, Diversify, with. And the quote comes from a man called William Sloane Coffin. William Sloane Coffin was a civil rights activist and a very good friend of Martin Luther King's. And what was interesting about Sloane Coffin is he came from one of the most privileged families in the East Coast of America, but decided to spend his life fighting for those that were less privileged than himself. And the quote is, "Diversity may be the hardest thing for society to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for a society to be without." And I think when we look at what's going on in our world right now, his words are as important today as they were when he uttered them over 60 years ago. So in Diversify, I partnered with Oxford University, and we have a lot of up-to-date data and research on where we are with the various underrepresented groups in society and what the benefits are when we better integrate them into business, society, and of course, all of our institutions. So I want to start with a bit of a personal story. This woman that you see on the screen, this powerhouse of a woman, is my great-grandmother. When I was a child, unfortunately, my grandmother died, and so my great-grandma became my de facto grandma. And she was such a powerhouse of a woman, and she would come to the UK a few times a year. My family are from Ghana, and my great-grandmother didn't speak English, but fortunately, I spoke our mother tongue Twi. And I remember as a kid being so excited by her trips because it meant I got to listen to her phenomenal storytelling. Ghanaian culture is steeped in mythology and folklore that's passed down generation to generation via an oral tradition. And one of the stories that she used to tell me is the story of Anansi the spider. The original Spider-Man, may I add. And the interesting thing about Anansi is he starts out at the bottom of the animal kingdom and decides he wants to figure out how to rise to the top. Now, the thing with being at the bottom of societies, it means you have to learn how to innovate. You have to learn how to turn no's into yeses, the kinds of yeses that those of privilege often take for granted. And so Anansi goes along to the sky god because he works out that perhaps the best way to rise to the top of the animal kingdom is to own the most precious item in the animal kingdom, which happen to be the stories of all wisdom that belong to the sky god. So Anansi goes along to the sky god and he says, "I'd like to buy your stories." And the sky god says, one, they're not for sale, and two, even if they were, what would a lowly spider like you do with them? As I said, when you're at the bottom of society, you have to learn how to turn no's into yeses. You have to learn how to innovate. And so Anansi persists, and at this point, the sky god is on the back foot, and he relents, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to set you a task that I've set kings and queens from surrounding nations. None of them have managed to succeed. I doubt you will." And so at this point, like I said, when you're at the bottom of society, you have to learn how to innovate. You have to learn how to turn no's into yeses. So Anansi goes away, and he somehow manages to complete this seemingly impossible task. The sky god is so impressed that he not only gifts him the stories, but also anoints him as the king of the animal kingdom. And here I am, thousands of years later, retelling the tale. Now, the reason why we reference the Anansi story is because there are two elements that I believe are vital for success. The first is equal opportunity, and the second is self-belief. Though the sky god didn't think that Anansi could complete the task, he still gave him the opportunity anyway. The same opportunity he had given the seemingly worthier candidates. And though the sky god didn't believe in Anansi, fortunately Anansi believed in himself. And I believe when you have equal opportunity coupled with self-belief, anything is possible. So what we have to be asking ourselves is, are we creating the kind of workplaces, the kind of culture that means that opportunity is indeed equal? And is the environment nurturing enough that means that everybody within it can truly believe in themselves? We know that many women suffer from imposter syndrome. And I think that much of that, of course, is because of the way we are conditioned in society, but also because the workplace has not been designed with us in mind. So these are the things that for those of us that are now rising into positions of leadership, we have to redesign to ensure that the workplace is truly inclusive. So another question that I always pose to leaders that they have to ask, and this is so important, when you look at your teams, ask yourself, is everyone in the room? Who's missing? If everyone isn't in the room, why not? And what are you going to do about it? Particularly from the perspective of gender. I think that what we've had with the gender movement, and it's brilliant that many women have been able to rise to the heights that now we're now seeing. However, it's been limited in that it's only a particular kind of woman that's been able to really thrive. And what we have to do is to ensure that this is intersectional and that all women are able to fulfill their potential. We know that the fourth industrial revolution is going to change and transform the way we live. Women have to play a key role in that change. We cannot not be involved, because if we don't, we've seen actually, without having that diversity of thought around the table, it does present serious dangers and serious issues. And I believe that women of all backgrounds need to be a part of that solution. So I want to tell you another story, and I just love this story. And this is what happens when you unleash the potential and the capacity of women. Women who you would believe, or who society has led us to believe, are not able to achieve in the way that others can. So I want us to go back to 1943 in Virginia. America was at war and needed all hands on deck, regardless of color or gender, in order to help the Allies defeat Hitler and the Nazis. And so a program was started at the Virginia Institute, a Women in Engineering program. 11 African-American women enrolled. There they would train and learn complicated mathematical codes that the machines were not yet sophisticated enough to process. Upon graduating, the women would go across the street to the Langley Institute, and there they would become known as human computers, processing these complicated mathematical codes. Over the years, this team would grow and grow, and many more gifted African-American women would join. By the early 50s, the war was over. But even though the Second World War had completed, the Cold War was in full effect. And America needed to be the first country to ensure that a man could get onto the moon, or they could launch a man into space. The Cold War was in full effect, and America was determined to beat the Russians, who at this point had been able to launch a rocket into space. However, by this time, Langley had been renamed NASA, and there was nobody able to come up with the calculations needed to ensure a safe landing for a man going into space, which meant that the heads of the NASA space program had no choice but to go to the African-American computers, the human computers, to see if there was anyone there that could help. And indeed, there was this woman, Katherine Johnson. Her calculations would ensure the safe mission for John Glenn and his Mercury mission. Her calculations would play a key role in the lunar landing. And for many years, her recognition, the recognition that she deserved and the contribution of women like her went unrecognized. Until many years later, the daughter of one of her male colleagues decided to write about these phenomenal women that she had grown up around. That story became the New York Times bestseller, Hidden Figures, and then obviously inspired the equally successful movie. And the story now was out. People knew the contribution that these African-American women had made in ensuring that America would win the space race. Fortunately for Katherine Johnson, she would live to see this recognition and would receive a Medal of Freedom from the then President Barack Obama. So here we see an example of what happens when you give women all of the tools they need to be able to thrive and achieve, and also how society is able to benefit as a result. Now, I want to talk a bit more about some data. So this man that you see on the screen is a man called Professor Tom Malone. He's the founder of the Center for Collective Intelligence at MIT. And when he set up this institute about 20 years ago, he wanted to answer a simple question. And the question was it possible to measure group intelligence, i.e. collective intelligence, in the way you could measure individual intelligence? And what he found was indeed you could. So then the next question was there a certain set of criteria that made collective intelligence much more likely? And he found that yes, there was. And so there were three sets of criteria that made collective intelligence much more likely. The first was the social perceptiveness of the group, i.e. could colleagues tell if another colleague really understood what was being expected of them and what was being asked of them. The second was the ease of conversation between the group, i.e. did everybody feel that they could contribute their ideas and they would be listened to? And also, was the group able to robustly debate an issue to come up with the best solution? I would argue that any business that has been able to scale, and many of you probably work for startups, any business that's been able to scale, without question, has the first two. The third, which is very interesting, was the number of women in the group. And we know for sure when it comes to the tech industry, without question, this part of the criteria is not being fulfilled. What Tom Malone and his team found was that the more women there were in the group, the better the group performed. And this is not to say that we are now replacing men with women. No, this is about saying the closer we get to gender parity, the 50-50 mark, the better it is for everybody. Because what you have is you have the diversity of thought, you have the diversity of perspectives that mean that you can come up with the best outcome because your blind spots are filled in. So what I would really like to get across is that this stuff is not only morally the right thing to do, as I've shown. It's not only economically the right thing to do, as we see that actually this is better for the bottom line and all the data points to that. It's also vital if any organization is going to sustain itself into the future. Young people are thinking very differently to previous generations. And young people are watching in ways that previous generations didn't, where companies are concerned, and the kind of impact companies have on society as a whole. But even more than that, what we know, and as this quote shows from Margaret Mead, as this quote suggests, is that actually every time we liberate a woman, we liberate a man, because what we do is we raise the standards for everybody. And I think that the tech industry has such an important role to play in getting this right, in ensuring that women are trained and upskilled, that we are going as far back as we need to in terms of ensuring that young girls are interested in STEM and excited about science. That we are making sure that we're looking at industries where there may be women with transferable skills to bring them into the tech sector. And that this is a long-term approach. But most of all, we are working on the culture in many organizations to ensure that they are inclusive of women. So thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of the summit. And here's to making change and inclusion the norm. Thank you.
So good afternoon again and welcome everyone, and thank you so much to June for such a great presentation. Just lots of wisdom and insight there to chat about. June is joining us now, of course, for a Q&A session, and so if you want to put your questions into the panel, I can put them directly to her. So Welcome, June. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I guess I'll go with one that I've been thinking about, which is I guess I wanted to hear maybe something about your own career trajectory and how you've gone from a few different roles, and maybe about your ambitions when you were in school. Like, is that how you where you are now anything related to what you thought you might end up doing?
Well, first of all, lovely to meet you, Eleanor. I'm really looking forward to this. I think when I was at school, I didn't necessarily want to be doing the job that I'm doing now per se, but I definitely wanted to be a TV presenter. And so that was what I always wanted to do. So it was an absolute joy when I got to do it. But then as I presented for a very long time, I had started having different interests. So, I'm loving what I am able to do now, and the sort of range of the type of work I do.
And would you say that, I guess, did that feed in with your own personal growth? Like, did those two things feed in together to each other?
Oh, without question, definitely. I think, as I matured, as I got older, wiser perhaps, I just sort of started wanting to have even greater impact. And I think actually, particularly in the industry that I'm in, often a lot of the impact is behind the camera, and I'm someone who's been in front of the camera my whole life. So it's nice to be able to do both, and then also work with other industries to help, move their diversity and inclusion agenda along.
Great. And then, so I guess to change tack slightly, somebody has come in on the chat and they have said, Alex has asked, do you think it's possible permanent changes to the workplace, for example, more virtual working as a result of COVID, will help or hinder women in the workplace? So that's getting right into the...
Well, Alex, as we know, the data shows that it's almost like a combination of both. We know that women disproportionately are doing the housework and the household chores, as well as even if they are working women. And so we have to figure out what that balance is, and how, as employers can support their employees in this new way of working. Because even in a post-COVID world, I don't know if we're ever going to go back to full-time, 5 days a week, every day in the office. I think it's perhaps going to be a bit of a hybrid model. And if it is, we have to make sure that women are not impacted disproportionately, and also that we don't go back, because there's frightening data that suggests that perhaps if this isn't addressed, we could lose 25 years in terms of the progression of women in the workplace. So yeah, it's something to consider.
Great. And then Anita Gray has put in a question, and it sounds like it's something quite specific to where she is. She's asked, how do you manage the dichotomy of separate specific employee networks and intersectionality? And if you have any tips on that, if you could give some.
Very good question. I think you need a combination, don't you? You need underrepresented groups to have their own safe space, so that they can express themselves without fear of any sort of retribution. But then you also need some sort of ally stream within that, because you don't want to constantly be preaching to the converted. This stuff only changes when we get the majority of people in the workforce seeing things in this way. And obviously, when it comes to leadership, we know that most leadership roles and positions are held by men, are held by white men. And so we really need to ensure that they are at the table when it comes to the process of change.
Great. And then Mary Kent has asked, so many companies say they are inclusive, but how does it actually get ingrained in the culture? So I guess this is like, yeah, I guess it's trying to get like big ideas and words down into specific actions.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying and being, isn't it? There's a difference between saying and doing. And you only know by how your workforce feel And I think that actually, and then also looking at the data in terms of your progression rates. I think whoever rises to the top tells you what your company culture is. If there is a dominant type of personality, if there is a dominant type of person that tends to progress, well, that's your culture. And if that isn't particularly diverse, then it means that there is something about that culture that is quote unquote exclusive. So it has to be looked at. And I would say in terms of how you create an inclusive culture, I think conversation really matters, and allowing people to share their lived experiences with colleagues. I think you need to then also have proper interventions designed. You need to jumpstart the system. I know a lot of people don't like targets, but we seem to not have a problem with them when it comes to financial targets or any other targets that we have every intention of meeting. So why is it any different when it comes to people and diversity and inclusion?
Great. And Mary has also asked, have you faced any discrimination yourself in your own career journey? And if so, how did you respond? Because I guess that kind of relates to the, like you're talking about the qualities people have when they succeed and get to the top. So maybe you would also say something about your own qualities that you feel, I guess, have kind of brought you to where you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've definitely experienced discrimination in my career many times throughout my career. And also the thing is, there's a lot of the covert stuff. Often we focus on the overt stuff that's, so obvious. But actually, it's the covert stuff that's much more harmful. And the stuff where you're not sure if that's what it really is. And therefore, you then start questioning yourself and second guessing yourself. But yes, in terms of how I've handled it, I would say I've got a very short memory in the sense that I try not to remember a lot of it. Also, I've always made a point of knowing people outside of my own industry and having strong networks. I have a very big global network. And I think that's also provided me with confidence because I've always known I would have other opportunities and other options if it didn't work out in one place. And I do think when you're from an underrepresented group, you have to try to do that because the playing field is not level and the path is not linear. And so you need to almost broaden your possibilities and opportunities. It's not fair, but sadly, that is the way it is at the moment.
So is that something that would have helped you, I guess, transition from entertainment over into behind the camera kind of stuff?
Definitely, for sure.
Very.
You're on mute.
Thank you for telling me that. Great. So Debbie has asked, do you yourself believe in quotas? And she says that she runs the Midlands Women in Tech Awards. And some people believe that we shouldn't have separate awards, etc., or programs supporting women. But if we keep doing the same, we are not seeing more women in this particular space. And I guess that's something that applies. I think I see that in entertainment a lot. Even in the Oscars, there's never been a female director nominated. So you could see the advantage of creating a female directors award. But not to talk over you, June. Go ahead.
Feel free, Eleanor. Well, I think let's take the word quota out of it. For some reason, that word is triggering for people. So let's say targets. I think targets are very positive and very affirmative, and that it makes us think, okay, this is something that's actually a positive thing. And I think that actually, as I said before, we always set ourselves metrics and a timeline and a deadline for things that we are absolutely committed to achieving. And I think that when we shy away from that, where this issue is concerned, what it says is that it's not a must-have. What it says is, oh, it would be nice if we did it, but it doesn't say, actually, yes, this is something we have to do. And then on top of setting yourself targets and a time to meet them by. I think you also need to be constantly measuring and monitoring to see if they're working. So that way, if anything needs to be adapted, it can be. But for me, I think they work.
So basically, it's kind of a question. It comes down to how passionate are you about what.
Not just how passionate, just how serious you are about it for the business.
Yeah. And where did you find, I guess, was there a moment for you where you realized that this was something that you were serious about yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to. It's my lived experience, I've experienced it, I've lived it my whole life. So knowing how it's adversely impacted me is a driver to want to change things. And also seeing how much unbelievable talent there is out there that perhaps hasn't been given the right opportunities because of parts of their identity that they have no control over. That just seems so unfair. So that makes me definitely want to do something about it.
Great. And maybe, I guess, to do with your new role, your role in the BBC, is there anything specific, or maybe you could talk about how you've brought, or I guess made it so much part of the culture in the BBC now? Because I think it's really clear, everybody, people are seeing how much progress has been made there. So yeah, if you could say something.
Well, I think the thing is, it's one of those where you really have to ensure that you bring people with you. And I don't think that's just specific to the BBC. I think that is specific to any large institution, and an institution that has been around for a very long time. And that means that there's a specific way of doing things, and a way of doing things that has worked up until now, So it means that you have to really bring people with you and allow them to design the change. And so when we look at, let's say, the tech industry, where we know that there aren't enough women, and we know that there is actually not just a pipeline issue, there's also a supply issue, in the sense that with other industries, perhaps the pipeline is there, you just need to go and find the people to create the pipeline, as in, there are people with the skills necessary and needed. Whereas with tech, there aren't enough women for all sorts of systemic reasons. So you have to go and design the pipeline. And so I think when you're dealing with institutions that have been around for a very long time, that are have been successful with the way things have been done, but yet society is changing and they have to adapt to that change in order to survive and exist, you have to bring people with you. And I say the best way to create culture change is to, of course, have the sort of the mandate from on high, but actually allow the middle to design it. So you say where the destination is, but you allow people to create their own journeys, and that way they buy into it.
And are there any, I guess, values? I know positivity is probably, just such a big driver in all this. And is that one of the values? And are there other things that can help there?
Yeah, I think positivity. I think focus is very good, and sort of a clear direction. It just makes life easier because everybody knows what the goal is. And then also I think being comfortable with failing. You're not going to get it right all the time, and that's okay too. You can fail and modify what hasn't worked. So I think that's what I would say on that front.
Great. And I guess in terms of learning yourself, like who have been the people and what encounters have you had? If you could say something about those that I guess have taught you.
Of course, I mean, I'm constantly learning, and I'm really lucky to have lots of mentors and sponsors in my life and career who've really championed me and helped me grow and succeed. I think I really like learning from people who have achieved things that I would like to achieve, and that's not just women. That's not just people of color. I think even, those that have more privilege in society, there's also something to learn about that mindset of feeling that you can do, because when you come from an underrepresented group, you're told from day one that certain things aren't possible for you. So there's a whole level of unlearning that has to happen, particularly for women. And then obviously when you factor in other protected characteristics, you sort of, this intersectional approach means that sometimes there's a lot to unlearn in order to fully fulfill your potential. And it's daily work, because these beliefs were ingrained over a long period of time and they don't just leave overnight. So that's what I would say on that front.
Great. And are you a mentor yourself? Do you mentor people? Is that something?
Yeah, you see, I'm as I've sort of gotten older. Now, before I used to do a lot of sort of mentoring. Now I'm much more sort of strategic. I'm not the person that you're going to be on the phone with all the time with your issues. And no. What I'm good at is, where is it you want to be? Who's the person I can introduce you to? What's the thing that's going to help move you to that next place? And I think that actually it's very important for people, particularly when you're at the start of your career or you're building, to know the role that people can play in your life, so that you're not approaching that relationship in the wrong way. You're not approaching a sponsor like a mentor, because a sponsor probably doesn't have time to be your mentor. But actually, the fact that, because what they say the difference is, a mentor will show you the door, a sponsor will open the door. And often the person opening the door is much more impactful on your career than even the one showing you the door. And it's impossible. It's absolutely vital that you know that and know the difference.
And I guess, yeah, we don't have much time left, but maybe I'll ask you, I know you've got a lot of probably loads of wisdom, but if you had to distill it down to maybe one thing that a woman who's trying to maybe get involved in an area that they aren't experienced in, and I guess want to step into rooms where they don't feel like they belong, what would you say to them?
I would say, well, who says you don't belong there, for starters, right? Who says? And then the second thing is, be okay with being okay, i.e. just good enough. Often we feel we have to be unbelievable, we have to be exceptional, and men don't feel that same pressure. And I think that being okay with being okay means that you will push past your fear and discomfort to at least take the first step. And when you get there, maybe you might find that it's too much. But also you might find the opposite, where you realize that actually, yes, you can do this and you can do it really well. And so it's about pushing through that fear and that discomfort.
Thank you so much, June. That's been amazing. Now we really got a lot out of you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you're leaving us. This is the end of the festival, and it's been an amazing couple of days. We've had great interactions and great, I guess, thoughtfulness. A little bit of what June mentioned there, and really focusing on what are the specific things, actionable things that people can do.